So to introduce myself properly, I'm Caroline Bedale. I'm from Greater Manchester KOMP. I'm a retired NHS worker. I used to work in health promotion and public health. I retired about 5 years ago. This presentation has been developed by the KOMP working group on ICSs. It will give a brief run through of the background to integrated care systems and to the white paper of February 2021. And I have to say that the legislation is expected any day now, and I'm really quite glad it didn't come out this week, because otherwise I'd have had to revise this and put stuff in about it. But we are expecting the Health and Care Bill very soon. A lot of areas are already claiming to be ICSs, but they don't actually have the finance systems or statutory support for joint decision making. So they're not really ICSs yet. The legislation will fix that. There isn't going to be a lot of time for questions or discussion on the background in this presentation. It's really intended just to remind you what you already know and to set ICSs in context. The whole session, I hope, will take about 45 minutes, and then there will be some time for questions and discussion. But if you could keep your comments and questions on the content of the presentation to the minimum, email me afterwards if you want, and I think Tom's going to put my email in the chat, or if I can put it in the chat later. Because this whole presentation will be on the KOMP website, so you can get the detail and the references there. In the discussion at the end, what I'd really like to concentrate on is what you're already doing in terms of campaigning or any plans, including using the KOMP campaign materials. So that's just a brief introduction. Really, the first question is, well, don't we want integrated services? It seems a bit strange to be perhaps campaigning against integration. And yes, of course we do. But what we want is something rather different from what the government intends. And words don't always mean what we think they mean, like integrated and integration. And what we want, as you can see on the slide, is not really what ICSs are about. In fact, you could say that integrated care systems is a dishonest label. It's not about collaborating to improve patient care, but it is about financial systems to cut costs and enable profit sharing, and to further embed the private sector in running the NHS and probably social care as well. It is about integrating organisations, not services. And we mustn't forget that many services do already work well together across organisational boundaries, and staff work really hard to reduce barriers. And a final point on what ICSs do or don't mean and what integration means and what the government wants is that there's actually not much evidence that integration necessarily does what the government says it wants it to do, like reducing hospital admissions or cutting costs. And there are some references and more information about that in the notes page of this presentation, which, as I say, will be on the KOMP website. So how did we get here in England, to start with? I'm going to take you around the world in a bit, but how did we get here in England? Well, breaking up, or you could say infiltrating the NHS, has been a 40-year campaign, and it's been against the welfare state, not just about the NHS. So Thatcher's and Major's governments privatised many public services, such as utilities, but it was only really non-clinical services in the NHS, like catering, cleaning, laundry, portering, security, which were privatised, not at that time NHS clinical services. And despite vigorous campaigning, the Conservatives introduced the internal market with the purchaser-provider split and set up NHS trusts, which would opt out of local NHS health authority control. And then under the Labour government from 1997 to 2010, things speeded up. So there were semi-autonomous foundation trusts, and then there were ICATs, I don't know if people remember that, independent clinical and assessment and treatment centres, which were only open to the private sector. And they took a lot of extra funding that was put into the NHS. So although that Labour government did put funding in, a lot of it went to the private sector. And I only found out fairly recently, really with doing this presentation, that Brown actually commissioned a report from McKinsey, which recommended the sort of moves we've become used to, all about reducing the cost, particularly of expensive hospital treatment, and supposedly doing more about preventing ill health. But of course, if the social determinants of health were really tackled, like income and poverty, disadvantage, discrimination, housing, education, they would not be cheaper. And there's not been that extra funding for community health or mental health services. So that shift away from expensive hospitals hasn't really happened, but that's what they've been aiming for. And then, of course, there was the Lansley Act, the 2012 Act, which was actually written for Lansley, mostly by McKinsey. We assume most people are familiar with that campaign against the Act, which abolished the Secretary of State's duty to provide a comprehensive national health service. It restructured the NHS, created clinical commissioning groups, abolished primary care trusts, and probably most importantly for us, it made it compulsory for CCGs to put services out to tender. That was Section 75. And that, of course, led to a massive influx of private sector providers for even quite small contracts and for clinical, not just the non-clinical contracts. And it also transferred public health to local authorities and only ring-fenced their budgets for a short time. As I said, I was also going to look a bit about the World Economic Forum, the world. The World Economic Forum, in case you're not familiar with it, is really a chance for big corporate companies to meet with world leaders. And McKinsey got in on the act there too. So you can see what they were doing for the world was what they'd also done for England. And the World Economic Forum prepared 2 reports in collaboration with McKinsey. And lo and behold, Simon Stevens, who's now, of course, the chief executive, not for very much longer, chief executive of NHS England, and he had been the health policy advisor to Blair, and he was president of global health at United Health Group. He was the project steward for the first of those 2 reports, which was concerned with healthcare financing gap. And what that report and the second one were really about redefining the health industry to allow global corporations to take over more public services, about looking at new ways to deliver integrated or accountable care using the US model, and to cut the cost of care, so things like rationing, shifting the cost burden onto individuals, raising productivity, greater use of digital, which we'll come on to later, and payment related to value rather than volume. There was also an emphasis on preventative care and on more integrated care pathways. So this was all about finding ways to involve the private sector more, to use fewer, obviously expensive staff, for example, by use of digital technology, and to ration and or increase productivity, and to increase self-care, which is something else we'll come back to later as well. So back to England, and you'll probably vaguely remember these various reports, the 5-year forward, the next steps. That was where we first had the official reference to what became known as integrated care systems. There were sustainability and transformation partnerships. So we've got here really some milestone dates, reports, plans, new organisations, names and terms. Really an important point to note is that many of the measures introduced by the 5-year forward and by next steps mirror the recommendations of the World Economic Forum reports. And all this was being done without statutory backing for the changes. And there were a couple of judicial reviews which failed, but it seems that they probably pushed NHS England to slow down and concede that they would need to produce some legislation at some point. And that takes us to the long-term plan. Now, again, you may well be already familiar with this. And if you look at what the stated rationale was, much of it, in a sense, was true, and we'd probably agree with it. Things like changing pattern of need, we need to look at changing from diagnosis and treatment of illness to improving, well, not change from, actually, I would say it's more we need to have both. We need to be improving population health as well, people's health as well. Certainly looking at collaboration rather than competition, we probably wouldn't argue with that. And about decisions being taken closer to where people live. Again, we wouldn't disagree with that. But what the reality was that it was about reducing services, making cuts to meet the need, meet the fact that there actually wasn't the increase in funding that was needed. And it was also, yet again, increasing the role for the private sector in actually now in planning systems, not just in providing services. So this set the immediate context for the move to ICSs, which became the new, more acceptable name for accountable care organisations. So this is where the ICSs start to take over from about 2018, 2019. Some places, Greater Manchester, one of them, start calling themselves ICSs, or that they're moving towards being ICSs. And we're going to look in a bit more detail about what they are and how the white paper proposed transforming the plans for them into legislation. A lot of you took part in the NHSE consultation that started last November and just went on for a couple of months over Christmas and New Year, I think hoping that a lot of us wouldn't notice it. And about 5,000 KOM people did respond, but actually it looks as if NHSE put those all on one side or in the bin or somewhere and didn't really take much notice of all our answers and just concentrated on the replies they wanted. Within the move to ICSs, you'll see that there are key roles that were seen for ICSs to take about transformation, performance, and a requirement to move towards a population approach. In terms of system transformation, what they mean by that is about partners agreeing to changes to local health and care services and develop supporting strategies so that the providers in every system, through partnership or any new collaborative arrangements, must be able to, this is a quote, deliver relevant programs on behalf of all partners in the system. And referring back to the long-term plan, that there would be system-wide governance arrangements to enable a collective model of responsibility and decision-making. So it is quite different from, if you remember back to when trusts were first set up, that they were very much in competition with each other. This is starting to talk about collective models, collaboration, working together. In terms of performance, it's talking about partners collectively managing and improving the overall financial and operational performance of all the NHS organisations within the system. So things like standard operating procedures, designating services to ensure their sustainability, wider service reconfiguration, and also challenging each other and holding each other to account through agreed systems. The requirements about population health are really about new models of care, which are said to be about more preventive care, more locally and community-based, about using data and digital to identify high-risk groups or individuals and redesigning services to meet their needs. That's what's meant by a population health approach. For staff, it was about breaking down professional barriers and getting lower graded staff to take on wider responsibilities. Any of you who work in the NHS, I'm sure, will be familiar with that. And it's still mostly about cutting costs, and it's about opening up possibilities for the private sector. I'm now going to look a bit about, by the way, can I just ask, are any of you seeing some red lines and things on the screen? Does that come from, I've got some red lines on my screen. I'm just wondering where they've come from, but I'll carry on if the rest of you haven't got them. Perhaps you can put it in chat if there's a problem and Tom can contact me. So this slide and the next one, I'm going to switch between them a bit because there's a diagram on the next slide which puts into pictures what I'm saying about what the white paper proposals were. And the NHSE guidance came out last week, so I have tried to update this presentation to take account of some of the detail in that guidance, but it is very detailed, so I'm going to try not to go into too much detail on that. So the diagram, and this is a sort of a trying to represent what's being proposed in terms of control, that's the red arrows or the pink arrows, and accountability, which is the green arrows. So we know that the white paper and the guidance are proposing to abolish CCGs, that they're talking about an ICS board which would control the overall budget and the overall management. And it's clear now from the guidance that that could have just a single local authority representative.
Once Dido gets the job, there'll be nothing.
Sorry, could somebody mute, please? Whoever that was. Thank you. That there would be a subordinate health and care partnership board. Simon Stevens, I think, referred to it as being at a conference run by the HSJ as being advisory. So it clearly doesn't have the same level of powers as the ICS NHS board. And the particularly worrying thing is that private providers could be part of the ICS board and or the health and care partnership board. So just to look at the diagram again, you'll see the ICS NHS body, that's what I'm referring to as the board, which would be responsible for the day-to-day running of the ICS. And that has quite, I'm going to look at who might be included on that board in a moment. And the Health and Care Partnership Board, subordinate, but including a whole range of different organisations. So in terms of the white paper and the NHS guidance, they talk about ICSs as having two forms of integration. And they say to remove some of the cumbersome boundaries to collaboration and to make working together an organising principle, and greater collaboration between the NHS and local government. So you see local authorities on the Health and Care Partnership, as well as wider delivery partners. And that the aim is to deliver improved outcomes to health and wellbeing for local people. And that they will also have a duty to collaborate with each other. So this is now a duty that's being recommended. According to the NHSE guidance last week, the ICS NHS body will have a minimum of 10 members, 4 executives, chief executive and finance, nursing and medical directors. And I think that some of the allied health professionals are not very happy about being excluded from that it's just nursing and medical. It'll have 3 independent non-executives, who would be a chair and at least 2 others. And it says that they will not normally hold positions or offices in other health and care organisations within the ICS footprint. But that could include the private sector. And there will be 3 partner members, 1 from an NHS trust, 1 from general practice, and just one from a local authority. And it says they will not be acting as delegates of those sectors. So they're meant to somehow divide off their personal expertise when they're on that body from their day job in whatever sector they come from. And of course, that could include the private sector, particularly from GP practice, given what we know about Centene and others taking over GP practices. But beyond this, the rules are quite flexible. So systems can add more people to that board to suit their needs. They have to be approved by NHS England, and it says that the board should be an appropriate size to allow effective decision making to take place. But again, it gives more scope for the private sector. The rules for the partnership boards haven't been published yet, and it says they'll be published separately. But the guidance indicates that they must have a chair jointly selected by the NHS body and by local authorities. And it says some systems will prefer the partnership and the NHS body to have separate chairs, which means that some of them could have the same chair for both of those bodies. And there's also meant to be further guidance on provider collaboratives and quite where they sit. So you'll see the box down at the bottom, the providers. I don't think it's clear yet, or I haven't found it in the guidance yet, exactly how the ICS NHS body and the ICS Health and Care Partnership will relate to providers. and whether that's individual providers or provider collaboratives. And that's why those arrows, the pink ones coming down and the green ones coming up, are shaded and dotted, because it's not clear, certainly to me, exactly how they will work and who will be responsible and accountable to who. So as you can see, local authorities won't actually be controlled by the ICSs, but they will very much be drawn into the system, because they will have this duty to collaborate, and they will be part of that partnership board, which will be feeding into the NHS body. And the private sector is still very much there. The white paper said, we anticipate that there will continue to be an important role for voluntary and independent sector providers. And that's especially so because of the removal of so-called removal of competition. But actually what it means is that you will have non-competitive contracting. So going back to that slide before, we're all expecting the legislation to remove the Lansley Act, Section 75, about requiring the requirement to tender. But what we also know is going to be added is non-competitive contracting, whereby the ICS can choose to award a contract to an organisation that's already providing or to any other without any tendering. And there's also going to be the removal of the public contracts regulations, which actually provide safeguards in terms of environmental, social and labour law. They are to be removed. And also the removal of the ability for the ICS to take account of contractors' previous performance and whether they're adequately equipped to do the job. I wonder if they're removing that so that Dido Harding can get the chief executive job. That's just a personal thought. So what we're seeing is the NHS moving from being a market, a regulated market, to being an unregulated market. And there's no definite proposals yet for either social care or for public health. They keep saying that the government keeps saying that they're committed to bringing forward proposals on social care reform. They've talked about producing proposals for the future design of the public health system, but actually in the white paper for public health, obesity and fluoridation were specific areas mentioned. So certainly not the whole range of public health. In terms of social care, the white paper talked about a new duty for the Care Quality Commission to assess local authorities' delivery of their adult social care duties, and a new power for the Secretary of State to intervene where, following that assessment, it was considered that a local authority was failing to meet their duties. And the Secretary of State could also make payments directly to social care providers, which of course are nearly all private sector. So that seems to be removing some of local authorities' current powers. This is now about some of the responsibilities that ICSs will have. We talked about how their structure, and you've looked at the diagram. Now we're going to look at what their responsibilities are, or what the white paper and the NHSE guidance say about their responsibilities. So the NHS body, the top body, they must produce a plan to meet population health needs, which will be binding on all the NHS providers. They must produce a capital plan, which looks about how the capital expenditure should be prioritised locally within a system-wide limit. So that looks like it's going to be put some limits on foundation trusts, for example, and their capital plans. They must secure the provision of health services to meet the needs of the system population. And there's talk about joint decisions through joint committees. Currently, joint committees aren't really legal, even though they've actually, to some extent, been operating. And they must also delegate to place level and provider collaboratives. So although they will be in control, this is an attempt, I think, to try and make sure there's still some more local neighbourhood place level, particularly where there are a lot of CCGs within an ICS area at the moment, who may not be happy about losing the sort of control they have at the moment. So this proposal would allow joint committees of the ICS and NHS providers, and NHS providers could form their own joint committees. I'm not sure that whether that can actually include the private sector. I haven't been able to find out exactly whether that would include private sector or not. But it does say that joint committees could have representation from other bodies such as primary care networks, GP practices, community health providers, local authorities, or the voluntary sector. And I think it may mean the private sector as well, because they talk about appointing individuals who are not board members or staff of the ICS NHS body to be members of any committee it is established. So it looks as if they probably can include the private sector in committees as well. And the the ICS NHS body can also establish place-based governance arrangements with local authorities and other partners. Again, does that mean private sector? And they would jointly drive and oversee local integration. So private companies could get on committees with delegated authority for use of resources, because it says that the committee of the ICS NHS body would have delegated authority to take decisions about the use of ICS NHS body resources. Overall strategy will be at the ICS NHS body level, and it will bind all NHS organisations, as I've said, into the plan and into financial control. The NHS guidance says that they will lead integration within the NHS, bringing together all those involved in planning and providing NHS services to take a collaborative approach to agreeing and delivering ambitions for the health of the population. And they will arrange for the provision of health services in line with the allocated resources across the ICS. So that the level of allocation is clearly going to be crucial. And that doesn't seem to have been sorted out yet as to exactly how those resources will be allocated or what the level of those resources will be. Probably based on historical allocations at the moment, but we don't know whether that will change in the future. The ICS NHS body must also establish the Health and Care Partnership, the subsidiary body. And it's probably at that level where decisions on service design and delivery will be taken. And the ICS Health and Care Partnership will include a whole range of representatives, as you can see, from health, social care, public health, and others. It's noticeable that in the white paper and in the NHSE guidance, they refer perhaps rather coyly to others who we're sure could be private providers, as well as they do sometimes mention things like social care and housing providers, but of course they're private or at best arm's length organisations. The Health and Care Partnership will have to develop a plan to address the wider health and public health and social care needs of the system. Fine, a bit like joint needs assessment perhaps at the moment. But it says that the NHS body and local authorities will have to have regard to that plan when making decisions, but won't actually be bound by it. It does say in the white paper that ICSs will have to work closely with health and wellbeing boards, that they'll have to have regard for joint strategic needs assessments, and they'll have to have regard to the Health and Care Partnership Plan. In the NHSE guidance, there is more detail about what's expected of the partnership body. It says they will have specific responsibility to develop an integrated care strategy for the whole population, using the best available evidence and data, covering health and social care, both children's and adults, and addressing the wider determinants of health and well-being. And that they expect the plans to be focused on improving health and care outcomes, on reducing inequalities, and addressing the consequences of the pandemic for communities. And as I've said, membership of the partnership body must include local authorities, as well as the local NHS. And beyond that, there's a whole range of organisations who could be involved. So there is a lot more detail in the NHSE guidance. So if you're interested in finding out more, you really need to have a look at that guidance, and the reference will be on the website. The final bit about ICSs specifically, I haven't actually finished the whole presentation yet, this is just about the ICSs, is about the triple aim duty that NHS England is recommending, though I think they'll probably do more than recommend, they're saying they must pursue the three aims of better health and well-being for everyone, better quality of health services for individuals, and sustainable use of NHS resources. So that means that sustainable use of NHS resources has equal footing with better health and well-being and with better quality of health services. And all the health organisations involved are constrained by the single pot budget, but that doesn't include social care yet. There's a new duty to collaborate, which does include local authorities, to promote collaboration across the healthcare, public health and social care system. And they say that the white paper said this was to rebalance from working for the interests of individual organisations towards all health and care organisations working collaboratively under one system umbrella. So it seems that the government wants to rope in local authorities into a partnership in which they may have only a single representative on the ICS NHS body, which will take decisions binding on all NHS providers. And that will inevitably affect relationships between the NHS and local authorities. And this is even before there's any sight of a bill on social care. NHS trusts will be judged by their contribution to the ICS plan as distinct from delivering safe and effective care to their patients. So it's tied to financial control on the whole system, it's outcomes based, and if there's unwarranted variation, things like right care may come into play. So it's definitely putting a lot more control on the finances of NHS trusts. And there are also changes to the system of payment, moving from payment by results to a payment system to support population health approach, more like a block contract or some sort of blended system of payments. But what they also say is that there can be local variation, and it removes the requirement for providers to apply to NHS improvement for local modification to tariff prices. If it's a block payment based on population numbers, although there may be some deprivation addition, depending on the size of that, it could lock in health inequalities. And because of the possibility of local variation in setting of the finance, the funding pot, it could even lead to breakdown of national agreements about pay if ICSs are allowed to make local decisions, including on pay and terms and conditions. And I'll come back to that a bit later. And then the health and care bill. Well, we don't know yet. As I say, we did think it might have been out by today, but it's not. We've got some clues, obviously, in the NHSE guidance and also in the briefing notes that went with the Queen's speech in May, where they talked about the briefing notes talked about the main benefits of the bill. It would include delivering on the proposals put forward by the long-term plan and building on the lessons from the successful vaccine rollout. I note that they didn't mention the extremely successful management of COVID and hospitals not being overwhelmed. I'm jesting there, of course. So what the briefing notes said was it would make it easier for different parts of the health and care system to work together to provide joined up services. It would remove bureaucratic and transactional processes that do not add value, and it would enable the system to most effectively prevent illness and support the ageing population, tackle health inequalities, etc. And it would ensure that the NHS and the wider system can respond swiftly to emerging issues while being fully accountable to the public, though it isn't clear what that actually means. Strangely, the briefing notes didn't specifically include the proposal that was in the white paper to scrap the Section 75 of the Lansley Bill, unless that's what they mean and is covered by removing bureaucratic and transactional processes that do not add value. It may well be that. And it says the main elements of the bill will be an integrated care system in every part of the country, ensuring NHS England is accountable to government, parliament and taxpayers, while maintaining the NHS's clinical and day-to-day operational independence. And there are a couple of rather bizarre bits of detail, like banning junk food adverts pre the 9 PM watershed, and putting the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch on a statutory footing to investigate healthcare incidents. So it looks as if it's going to be a slightly strange bill with some rather odd bits in it. We've already seen that the NHSE guidance adds more detail about the ICS structure, but there are still many questions about how ICSs will work in practice. And given the emphasis on ICSs being able to make decisions about the allocation of funding, about the whole plan for services, there could actually end up being significant local variations. And we could see this as really a dismantling of a national health service. So that sets the scene for where we're up to now. And we're now going to go and look at issues that all this raises for campaigning. So there's a potential for increased privatisation, private sector control. There's unequal partnership for local authorities, and there are workforce issues. There are clearly lots of other things, but these are issues which will be particularly important for us in terms of campaigning. I'm going to go through each of these issues in the next slides. But I thought I'd start with a bit of light, well, it's not really light relief, it's actually really important. These are some examples of campaigning in Merseyside, and I thought you'd like to see some of the things that they've been doing there. Merseyside campaigns have enlisted a wide range of supporters in their campaigning. The man on the beach obviously looked a bit cold, so they covered him up with some posters. The three people with the yellow and blue poster in the bottom left are from a collective campaign in Cheshire and Merseyside, Stop the White Paper, and they were leafleting hospital staff at 7 AM at a shift changeover, using KOMP, the new staff leaflets, which I'll talk about later. And in Merseyside, they've been putting up posters in parks, on railings, in shopping centres, in cafe and shop windows, anywhere where people pass by in the last year. They're using a series of posters and leaflets, such as those at the middle, top and bottom, in a social media campaign. Looks as though Bessie Braddock, remember her, who was MP in Liverpool? She's in Lime Street Station and she seems very happy to support the campaign. What the Merseyside people say is they would like you to follow them on Twitter and retweet their posts. Their hashtags are hashtag NHS resistance and hashtag save our NHS. So they're clearly doing some really good campaigning work there. So these are some of the issues. We're going to start off with looking at the legislative change. And I think this slide is probably fairly self-explanatory, but just to emphasise, the purchaser-provider split will remain. The white paper said, we will preserve the division between funding decisions and provisions of care. And Matt Hancock said publicly that he felt it was ideological and a false dichotomy to oppose the private sector and to say public sector good, private sector bad. That was his response in the Health Select Committee to a question by Rosie Cooper. So the proposed changes are, yes, as far as we know, to remove that section 75, to remove the NHS from the remit of public contracts regulations, and to diminish the role for the Competition and Markets Authority. But of course, this doesn't mean an end to outsourcing of non-clinical services, such as catering, cleaning, portering, security. And some NHS Foundation trusts are still setting up subsidiary companies and transferring staff, which usually means they lose out on paying conditions. And removing section 75 doesn't end tendering for clinical services either. And the removal of the public contracts regulations will make it even easier for private companies to win contracts, because those regulations are about safeguards for environmental, workplace, employment and social legislation. So without those regulations, the NHS will be turned into an unregulated market. It's going to be more vulnerable to private companies taking over. It won't have to worry so much about the environmental, labour and social legislation. And as I mentioned earlier, they won't have to take account of bidders' track records and their ability to deliver the contract. And ICSs will be able to choose to award a contract directly to a provider. And we've seen what happened with COVID contracts about that. And as I said, meanwhile, the outsourcing of non-clinical services continues. There's even more potential for privatisation because of increased fragmentation of the NHS and increased influence in other ways of the private sector. And you could argue that the very nature of the NHS is being changed by stealth. The overall shift to a population health approach, which has some benefits, obviously, if it's really considering the wider determinants of health, but it fundamentally changes the nature of the NHS from a publicly funded, publicly provided service based on need to a system that focuses on groups with high health risks and are therefore expensive. That is, they use hospitals a lot. Population health management is a particular population health approach, and it's quite a complex concept that we haven't really got time to go into in detail here. But it doesn't really mean improving the public's health, as you might think. It's much more about data and finance driving decisions rather than clinical considerations. In the USA, where the methods used by health insurance companies, it's about managing patient demand, identifying and targeting individuals with high risk and therefore more use of hospitals. It's a data-driven approach that focuses on self-care and changing health behaviours. It takes a micro-level approach to health inequalities rather than acting on the broader social determinants of health. And also, because of the collection of data to do this, this identification of risk, it creates a very valuable data set. And who controls that is really important. So it allows increased roles for the private sector. And the NHSE guidance shows that the scope for private company involvement goes far beyond just board membership. It also includes committees, which we've said have delegated powers over spending. It includes companies that have expertise on digital and data to inform population health management, as well as service provision. And it means a deregulated market. And we're now going to look at something called the Health Systems Support Framework, because that shows quite a bit about the increasing influence of private sector companies in the systems that are being used to run the NHS. The Health Systems Support Framework is something run by NHS England, where services are divided into 12 what we call lots, and they have accredited suppliers for each of these lots that NHS organisations are meant to use. There are now 219 accredited organisations, most of them private and many of them are global. Of the 219, very few are NHS or public sector, and there are dozens of US-owned companies, companies like Operos, Cerner, Optum, McKinsey, Palantir, PA Consulting, all the usual ones. And there are very opaque ownership patterns with layers of holding companies for some of them. And the detail of what these lots are may seem technical, but this framework is now underpinning the management of systems in the NHS. NHSE says that the Health System Support Framework has been structured around 3 areas: infrastructure, intelligence, and impact and intervention. And these cover everything from electronic patient records, local health and care records, health analytics and digital tools for system modelling, actuarial assessment, transformation and change support, patient empowerment and activation. I'll come on to that in a bit. Demand management and capacity planning. So there are all the sort of things that are useful and important for running a system, but they are largely going to be under the control of the private sector. And just to have a look at one of the lots, this is on analytics, digital tools for population health, business and clinical intelligence. The organisations in black are private sector. The organisations in green are NHS, mostly mission support units, as you can see. So that just shows you the sort of range of companies that are being included as approved suppliers. And patient empowerment and activation is an interesting one. Again, words don't necessarily mean what we think they should mean. Although there's nothing wrong with supporting people to understand more about their own health and care, this lot is mostly about digital or remote technologies to help self-care rather than face-to-face care with staff, and includes financial management of personal health budgets. So it's a personalised form of privatisation for individuals to buy healthcare. It's not about people being involved in planning the services they need or on ICS boards. It says nothing about things like expert patient initiatives, but it is about increasing dependence on private companies. And really, as already implied, another potential increase of privatisation is this increased use of data and digital. And I'm not going to say a lot about this. There's been quite a lot in the press recently about digital first and people not being able to get appointments with GPs and things like Babylon and GP at Hand, which lure younger, healthier people from GP practices. And it's not that we're against use of digital. Obviously, it has its uses, but it's about whether that's taking over from face-to-face contact and is going to be used perhaps to de-skill, down-skill, reduce the need for trained, qualified staff. The delivery of healthcare through algorithms, like the lot we've just looked at, the patient empowerment one, it's about emphasising self-care and reducing expensive hospital costs. It's about decisions being driven by data and finance rather than clinical, and using huge data sets to identify at-risk groups and develop targets. The use of algorithms can clearly have beneficial results. I've read about an algorithm that reads patients' vital signs and alerts medics to worsening conditions that are a warning of sepsis. Obviously, that's a very good use of algorithms, but any digital or app depends on how the program is written. You still need human involvement. And the increased use of algorithms could lead to a reduction in clinical judgment, and those who are not digitally literate could be disadvantaged. And it also, of course, needs clinicians to recognise when an algorithm or computer has got it wrong. Think of the exam grades fiasco last year. And all this means more scope for corporate contracts. There's an interesting Open Democracy article about the links between Greensill and the wider use of digital and data by the private sector. And the World Economic Forum report that I referred to much earlier talked about the primary locus of care will be the home, powered by technology and remote diagnosis, treatment and monitoring, with citizens sharing some of the cost of their elective care. So those sort of weasel words, sharing some of the cost. Are we going to see co-payments? Are we going to see people having to pay for some of this digital and data? Is it going to lead to people being sold various things that use their data or which use them as a monitoring system? And an organisation called Patients for the NHS talked about NHS plans include increasing surveillance of individuals' health and exercise behaviour through collecting data obtained by wearable devices such as smart watches. And that's then integrated into personal healthcare records. And the Office of Health Promotion is proposing a new monitoring system for those agreeing to wear digital exercise trackers. So the system manages to combine surveillance with new commercial opportunities. Attaining certain levels of exercise is rewarded by health points that can be turned into vouchers and redeemed at participating commercial outfits. And of course, there's also the point about patient data passing into corporate hands and the really big importance of us campaigning on governance issues. Big tech companies have already got access to data. We need to be making sure that they don't use it and misuse it. And then this is about the unequal partnership that local authorities will be tied into. We've already seen that they're really their main point on the ICS is the partnership board, which is subordinate to the NHS board. They've got limited representation, so there'll be reduced accountability through councillors. There are no proposals yet about social care, so we don't know whether their priorities may be distorted by NHS needs. And they may even have some of their estate and wider assets not actually taken over, but used in some way, because the NHSE consultation talked about them being the capital investment strategies being aligned with local authorities' management of their estates and wider assets. There are no proposals for public health except for fluoridation and obesity, and powers being taken away from local authorities because those two issues are both about being centralised. And it removes the current local authority referral process on reconfigurations. So although the NHSE guidance says that local authorities and the NHS will be equal partners, that's only in the partnership board, not in the main ICS NHS body. In terms of social care, priorities may well be distorted by the NHS because the NHS is most concerned about discharging elderly people, people with complex health needs, to free up beds in hospitals. But less than half of local authority social care expenditure is actually on elderly people. So it doesn't necessarily have the same priorities as the ICS is likely to have. And ICSs are likely to be dominated by the acute hospital sector. And the other issue for campaigning, workforce issues. The NHS Confederation talked about ICSs being the level at which accountability for system-wide workforce decision-making is based. And what that looks as if it's going to mean, and particularly since NHS England has also said in their guidance that they're talking about flexible working, an agile workforce, workforce sharing arrangements, and this idea of something called passporting, which would allow the workforce to be redeployed or deployed at different sites and even across organisations within the system. The flexibility in passporting, NHSE guidance talks about closer collaboration on workforce development across the health and care sector. Talks about developing new ways of working and delivering care that optimise staff skills, technology and wider innovation to meet population health needs and create flexible and rewarding career pathways. There should be workforce sharing arrangements and passporting or accreditation systems. There's also the potential for deregulation. The government says this is not about regulation in the white paper, but it could be, because over time and with changing technology, it says that the risk profile of a given profession may change. And while regulation may be necessary now to protect the public, this may not be the case in future. So we could see this as being part of the pressure for downskilling, having lower banded people taking on higher banded responsibilities, and relying on technology as a substitute for qualified staff. The deregulation of professions due to changing technology assumes that algorithms are risk-free, which is not true. And clinicians need to be able to recognise when a computer is giving the wrong answer and know what to do. And the change in the funding system, which I think I've already mentioned, if the ICS body has the power to agree how the allocation will be used to perform its functions in line with health and care priorities, and that you can do this by setting it at a local level, that could allow local decisions on staffing levels, skill mix, and on pay and terms and conditions. And if there are local funding levels that threaten national agreements, then local pay could lead to staff moving between areas, moving from an area where funding is cut, and that could further reduce care and staffing levels in that area. So there are serious implications for the workforce and for trade unions in the proposals. So let's now finally look at the KOMP campaign materials. There's a lot on the KOMP website. There is some detailed background documents. The corporate agenda one has detail about ICSs, where they've come from, what they will mean. The one on democratic accountability emphasises what KOMP campaigns for: publicly provided, publicly funded, universal, comprehensive service accountable to the local community. And that there should be democratic accountability through elected politicians at both local and national level. There is detail on those KOMP proposals on the website if you want to know more about that. The social care document looks at some of the main demands that KOMP makes, which are for a national care and support service fully funded to meet the needs of a modern advanced democracy through investment in the social infrastructure and progressive taxation, with a national framework setting out entitlements and standards delivered under local authority management. And that care and support services should be publicly provided and managed by local authorities, possibly with support from not-for-profit organisations, and funded through grants, not contracts. And community ownership of social care through involvement of service users, family carers, staff, and community groups. And the legislative proposals paper is an updated one produced when the legislation was first being discussed in 2019. And then the campaign tools that have been developed are really to put into practice KOMP's demands for a halt to the development of ICSs until there's full consultation with the public, local authorities and Parliament, and that the whole of the Health and Social Care Act from 2012 should be repealed, and that the NHS should be restored as an accountable public service to end contracting and the purchase of provider split, and to re-establish public bodies and public accountability to local communities. So the tools, there is a petition, there are model motions for Labour Party and trade union branches, there's a letter that can be used for councillors and for MPs, and I would say that letter does really summarise very well and encapsulates really the whole of this presentation and what the campaign is about. The motions could be amended slightly if necessary to include local information. And the article for the local press is a suggestion that people could use. You could again adapt it for local information. There were two leaflets produced originally, a larger one, the A4 one, which was meant to be more for campaigners, and the smaller one, which was aimed more at the general public. There are two new leaflets now, one aimed at staff, which is the one on the right, and one aimed at patients and the public, the one on the left. So they've recently been added. Do use them, do order them and use them wherever you can locally. And then finally, just some things perhaps for you to consider in your campaigning. If you're only just starting on campaigning around ICSs, what do you know already about your local NHS structure, about the various different providers? Is it already operating virtually as an ICS, or do you know what the plans are for establishing an ICS? And if you don't know the answers to those, where can you find the answers? And who can help you? Who can you make links with? Do you have any sort of relationship with local authorities? Do you know anything much about the health scrutiny and health and wellbeing committees? Have you got good links with trade unions, or are you in trade unions? What about Health Watch? And what about all the other campaigns? They're not all campaigns are called Keep Our NHS Public. There's also other ones, Save the NHS, Defend the NHS. There's We Own It. There's my mind's gone blank now. I can't think of all the other ones there are, but there are a lot of different campaigning groups locally and nationally. And also, what about community groups, particularly working with people with disabilities? What about patient participation groups? Are they active in your area? So there's a lot of other people you can involve in the campaign. And that's really what we want to go on to for discussion now, is what are you going to do now? What are your plans for campaigning? I'm going to stop sharing the screen and come back to people, see who's still here. There's a lot of things in the chat I can see about where you can order the information from. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat while I've been talking. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I've just seen that there were those red marks. I don't know how they got there. I don't think I did them, but somehow. So I'm afraid you've sat with red marks all the way through the presentation. I did notice them, but I was hoping they weren't showing on your screen. So I apologise. I don't know where they came from or how. Right. So I don't know if there were any quick questions in the chat, or if people would like to do what I suggested, which was really discussing about what you're doing for campaigning. So it's really, if you could put your digital hand up, and if you could keep your comments and questions fairly brief, then we can get as many people as possible. So I've got Ronald Mendel first, and then Victoria Ullman, and then Ken Kirk. So if I take those three, so Ronald Mendel first.
Caroline, I found your presentation very informative. I was taking notes. I don't think I kept up with you, but I found it very useful. My comment is really focusing on how do we reach the general public about what the NHS bill is going to mean to patient care and the future of the NHS. In Bristol, the Protect Our NHS group has developed a leaflet which is drawn from the Keep Our NHS material and the We Own It joint statement, which I was signed by about 15 organizations. And we kept our language very direct. The sentences are short. It's bullet points, because I think most people don't understand what privatization actually means to patient care. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is the consequences to patients and to staff and the general public, because this bill is reorganizing the NHS once again, all right, when we need more resources, more investments in the NHS to make sure that patients are receiving timely and effective health care. I hope that was short enough.
Thanks. I'm going to invite people to speak rather than me trying to respond to you. It's really more about getting a discussion between you all. So I think the next person I've got is Victoria Ullman. So if you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. I've got a question about discharging patients from acute care, because it seems that the whole pressure is to keep people out of hospital because that's the most expensive thing. And whether that be by self-care or administering treatments at home, but a major factor is bed blocking, and there's no nothing there to say they're going to try and alleviate the bed blocking by ensuring that there are places to discharge people to. But there is this removal of the obligation to assess patients before they're discharged on track. So what this will mean is that the hospitals can just discharge and deliver the patient maybe back home to a family who doesn't know what their needs are because they haven't been assessed, or somebody without the support being discharged, or even into a nursing home or a care home where those receiving them don't know whether they're equipped or able to deal with it. So rather than deal with the causes of the bed blocking, they're just making the bed blocking disappear, it seems to me, by not assessing the needs. I wondered if you could just confirm that seems to be the case.
I'm going to ask a few more people to, as I said, to ask questions, to make comments and questions. I'll try and come back to that one, Victoria, but it's not really my area of expertise, but I will try. I've got Ken Kirk and then in Gunnigal.
In where? I'm in Brighton, actually.
Right.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just a campaigning point that I think we ought to stress over and over again is the fact that we spend far less on our healthcare than virtually every other Western European country. we have fewer beds, we have fewer doctors and so on. And yet here they are introducing an act which is entirely devoted to driving down costs even further. We can't get good healthcare out of less money, and that's fundamentally what the Tories are interested in. And also a further point, which is an observation rather than anything else, but a campaigning point that we should bring out. There's nothing, originally the whole idea of adding the word integration instead of accountable care was to justify it, saying it's unifying health and social care. There's very little in the white paper. I don't know whether there will be in the bill, but there's very little in the wealth about integrating health and social care. And what about the whole direction of funding that goes into local authorities for social care? What's going to happen here? There's so much that is good campaigning direction, and we ought to make those points.
Thanks, Ken. Lynn.
Hi everybody, my name's Lynn Gunnagle and I'm the NHS campaigner down in the southwest of Devon, and I'm part of the Devon Sabre Hospital Services group, and I run my own campaign here in Dartmouth. We've lost our hospital here, we've lost all our NHS services here, and I think one of the main successes with the campaigns I've had in the past few years is to remind the public they pay. This is their money. They seem to think it's some kind of free gift bestowed from number 10 Downing Street. And so we're lucky that our old building, it's 120 years old. It was here long before the NHS. It is actually a brick building. So one of the things I did was invite people down to claim their family's brick because they paid for it. Every single brick and every single bed belongs to us. And I think the public need to be reminded about that. You know, if you want a million stories about what happens when you have your healthcare removed from a community, contact me. I have absolutely dozens of horrific stories, including things like injured people driving themselves to the nearest hospital miles away, with their foot slipping off the pedal because their shoe is filling up with blood. We've got a ferry that closes at night. We've got a road, the only other road out of town is flooded often, or a tree is across it, or there's an accident, so we're blocked. We've literally been abandoned, and they have every intention of abandoning everybody, no matter whether you live in a rural area or a city, it will happen. So I think one of the main things of the campaign is to remind the public that the NHS belongs to them and that they pay for it. Honestly, as a non-medical person, as just an ordinary member of the public, cannot thank Caroline enough for putting into layman's terms what all that gobbledygook actually means. Thank you, Caroline. I've learned so much on this meeting tonight. Also, I'm frustrated because everything that was spoken about tonight and everything that came up on the screen was about planning, checking, doing, but none of it actually mentioned delivering care. And I want to warn people as well about this, you know, getting people to look after their own health and having charities and local community groups involved. I mean, obviously, I am involved with the community group and I do know the benefits, especially mental health benefits of community groups. But we have a charity here. It's an NHS property and charity. It takes money from the NHS to provide services that are now no longer here. For instance, transporting vulnerable people. And then what they do is they take the money and then they charge the client as well. And now that charity has collapsed almost because they simply cannot get the volunteers. So we're paying for no service, and the people need to know that there's risk there as well. Thank you everybody for everything you've done. Honestly, I've been waiting for you all to come into my life. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lynn. I've got 3 people, I think, waiting. There's Pam, is it Remon, Martin Drew, and Gwen Vardigans. So Pam, first of all.
Yeah, I'm from Bromley, London Borough of Bromley, and I've been campaigning for many years, been out on the streets, not obviously in the last 2 years, and people just thought I was a crazy woman, saying that the NHS is, you know, will be insurance based. And now I've been out twice now in the last few weeks, And it's just been amazing. People just really want to know what's going on. They can see what's happening within their own GP practice now, and I think they're beginning to see the light. I've been handing out letters for them to send to MPs and councillors and people, and I've got loads and loads of emails from people who want to help. So I'm just absolutely gobsmacked at how people really are wanting to know why. And one man he was so angry, he said, why haven't I heard about this before? Why am I just hearing about it now? We have got our own leaflet, but I shall have a look at yours, and they're probably better than mine. But anyway, yeah, I'm quite sort of excited really, because, and if this was done in every town, then things would change, I think. Really.
Thanks, Pam. So Martin, next.
Hi, it's Martin here. I'm South Warwickshire Komp. Very interesting, thanks. Very, very good presentation. A lot of what you said, especially the history of it, is, I remember, where did the term come from? ICS is American. It was first invented, as you probably know, for the Hoover Dam, to amortize the costs of people injured there. That's that, and Mr. Stevens imported it over here. A couple of points that what we're doing here, we've been quite active, obviously not publicly. Yes, we did have one stall actually, but we're trying to get a big thing going for the birthday on the 3rd of July. ICS is one of the main things that we're going to be talking about. We've ordered leaflets, but the other one, and it's very pertinent to here, but also nationally, is the new testing mega lab, which is destined. You know, there was going to be two, one in Scotland and the other one's here in Leamington Spa. And we have asked, got our local MP involved in this, Matt Weston, is it privatised? And it's a brick wall, because we know Sodexo and Sodexo, which is a French company, is involved in recruitment. We've seen all the background to it, thousands of jobs and all this, but no, you ask them directly, who owns it? Matt Weston, the MP, has asked at Hancock on the 6th of June, could he please answer who actually owns it? And he said that question doesn't deserve an answer, but that was his reply. So this is very important, because we have a member in Coventry, Pat McGee, who works there now. She's a biologist, and she's saying what they're going to be doing, sucking out people. They're depriving the pathology labs of staff and going to private companies. But there's no confidence. It's this sheer arrogance of them not even deem a proper reply, a civil reply. And so that's very important, because it is a national testing. They're going to employ 2,000 people. So that is a big thrust that we will be promoting or raising awareness on the 3rd of July. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. And Gwen.
Yes, I work for Defend Our NHS, and we started long before the 2012 Act. We've always had lots of public consultation. We've now got lots of stalls. I wish I could be as optimistic as Pam. We stop in people and they're saying, I don't use it, even then we explain that you do use it. There's parents with children who say, I don't need it, I've never needed it. Where did your children be born? Where were they born? We've tried everything, and people just don't want to know. The young people say, I'm healthy, I don't need the NHS. They don't see that they're going to be, perhaps tomorrow have an accident and need it, or develop a disease and need it. It really is frustrating. We'll keep going. The stalls are going to be there every fortnight, and we've got all the leaflets we can, including the Komp leaflets. We've done leaflets on privatisation, what's good and what's bad. We've done background to the ICS. We've talked about different systems, the bureaucracy, the disintegration. I think that as soon as we can, we must have a public meeting. But for me, I'm going to start writing things in the press more and more. I write something more or less every fortnight now about various issues. The NHS, I've done a lot about the data. I'm going to start doing things about ICS, because people read the paper and perhaps they will read instead of walking away in the street. Some of them are rude. Some of them are just dismissive. Some of them look at you as if you've gone mad. And, you know, they'll say it's always going to be there. We pay for it through our national insurance, they say. They don't realise that it takes a lot more than national insurance to pay for it. And they just are so frustrating. And I don't know whether anybody else finds that, but, you know, it's really affecting people who say, well, what's the point? What's the point of going on the streets if people don't even listen? You know, so we've got to find some innovative methods of getting them interested, whether it's a lot more social media, perhaps.
Right, thanks, Gwen. Did anyone else? I don't think anyone else has got their hand raised at the moment. Oh, Philip Watson, you haven't got a digital hand, but I can see your ordinary hand. So, you want to come in? Philip, can you? We can't actually hear you, though it doesn't look as if you're muted. Sorry, Philip. Are you trying to speak?
Can I come in, please?
Yeah.
I tried to put a hand
Pauline.
up.
Yeah, this is Pauline. So, Philip, I'll come back to you in a minute, but if you can work out your microphone. Yeah, Pauline.
Yeah, hi. I'm from Halstead in Essex, near Braintree. Just a quick point. I know Deborah put it on chat. Hi, Deborah. But the national insurance doesn't pay for the NHS. So
That's right.
To clarify that. Yeah, what I'd like to say is on campaigning, I run the support NHS Halstead group. We're the only group in Braintree kind of area. There's one in Colchester and there's one in Chelmsford. And one in Southend. We collaborate when we do any protests or rallies and things like that, and we all come together. So that works really well if you've got other local campaigns around you. One of the things I've found is in such a small town, 16,000 population, it's not that small, but it, you know, I was running it on my own. No, you know, a few people turned up to initial meetings. I've been doing this now since February 2017. It's really hard to get people on board locally. I've tried putting up the stuff onto community pages like the street watchers and things like that, but they think it's too political. So that's a very sad route. I've been on the streets, I'm fine in my own town, but going into Braintree, I've actually been thrown out of the Lion Walk, which is a sort of a shopping centre square, claiming that I haven't got permission when I was campaigning to vote for NHS prior to the election. I stated I didn't need it, but they, you know, they were physically going to remove me if I didn't walk. So be aware of what your local authority rules are on where you can actually campaign. My own stamina has run out recently. Very disheartened because the amount of effort we've put in. I've attended CCGs, HOSCs on regular basis every month. I've talked to counsellors, I've sent masses of background information to counsellors as stuff is coming up on agenda to try and get them to understand what an ICS is and what, you know, all that meant as they were in the process of forming it. Mid Essex, Mid and South Essex have joined together. The CCGs have all merged and they've joined together and they've become the Mid Essex and South Essex, sorry, Mid and South Essex Partnership, health partners or health partnership. That's what they're called, their ICS. So I didn't even realise they'd actually formed it until I sussed, when I read this, what they were doing. I thought, hang on a minute, that's an ICS. So be aware as well that you might have an ICS, but it's under a different name. It's not called an ICS.
Thanks, Pauline. Can I just, is that all what you were going to say? Because there's a couple more people wanted to speak, and we're fast running out of time, I'm afraid.
Some sort of
thanks. Yes.
clues and things to look out for.
Thanks, Pauline. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got Elizabeth Rylance, and then I don't know if Philip's managed to work out his microphone yet. So Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Caroline, and everybody. I'm Elizabeth Rylance Watson. I've been part of South East London Keep Our NHS Public before such a grouping was even formed, and I'm a founder member of Southwark Keep Our NHS Public. So although quite a lot of the information you gave us tonight was not new to me, the brilliant way in which you put it together, Caroline, and the extent to which we know that we have a catastrophe in the making needs to be really understood. South East London 6 CCGs merged into the South East London CCG ICS. We were one of 3 groupings in the country that were literally, we knew, and in fact Simon Stevens told me so in a conference, that we were going to be amongst the top 3, and sure enough we were. So we've been tracking and watching and desperately trying to get all of our MPs to understand just what was going on under their noses. And quite frankly, there are some with excellent understanding, and there are far too many who ought to know better. The local authorities here in Southwark, we've got a new leader who I think is beginning to understand that he's going to be led by the nose, and has even in fact changed one of his councillors to have somebody whose job it is going to be to watch what on earth is happening and try and, so we are trying to stay as close as we can to those councillors. And what we're going to try and do, I'm sure, is to find ways of getting some of these slides and these messages to them pretty damn quickly, excuse my language, because we haven't got time. Our National Health Service is being dismantled. My background is international. It's global. It is international trade and services. I can tell you that our entire system is harnessed not for the excellent works that some colleagues were doing to protect the trade bill with the US. That was far too narrow focused. It thought of everything as a trade bill. What actually has been going on is to position the United Kingdom across the whole of health and care services as an absolutely massive commercial services and trade export. And this is why the time is right for the Centenes, and we will be demonstrating against Centene in Southwark this week. So I'm making that point, but I would like to say also that in the relatively recent Health and Select Committee, I could see Jeremy Hunt really pushing Matt Hancock to try and get some clarity. I don't think he was terribly content with the great ambiguities you've pointed out over the weakness, if you like, of this partnership, and then what was going to be the accountability of this body. So if it's possible at that kind of level to get back to him and look at what he's been saying in his reports and saying, you know, almost we now agree with you. We know you were Secretary of State for 6 years and you didn't do all sorts of things, but actually at this moment in time, you really need to question what this bill is going to do, and you must help to stop it going through Parliament, because they've got a majority to die for here. So they've got to be different ways. So that was one. And then what
sorry,
else was,
Elizabeth, I'm
sorry
to stop because I think Philip's
yes.
still wants to come in, and we are running over time.
So those were the key points.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Workforce and more workforce. That's the big threat. Thank you.
Yes. Philip, did you want to speak? I'm afraid we can't hear you still. I'm afraid, I think we're going to have to, there's somebody called Sarah Lazenby down who has got her hand up. I'm going to take you as the last person, Sarah.
Well, just very quickly, it's really to give emphasis. Somebody, a man, I think, talked about the cost of the NHS versus the money spent in Europe, various European countries. And I've thought about that as something absolutely everybody could understand. So I would like to suggest that it might work well if we had a leaflet that gave bare outline written down on a sheet of paper, and then went out and handed out leaflets with that statement about the money. People really do understand things about money, and if it's going to cost less, it's going to be worse. And as they do know it's underfunded now. They hear about it quite frequently. So I just wanted to reinforce that, that's all.
Right. Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'm going to just make a few very brief comments to finish, because we are running a bit. I'll aim to finish in a couple of minutes, if that's okay with everyone. I can't really do any better than those of you who talked about your campaigning, just to say that the different range of things that people are doing, they sound brilliant. And I'm really sorry for the few people who have had bad experiences or are feeling rather disheartened. All I can suggest is, if you can find even a couple of other people locally who you can do it with, rather than feeling you're on your own, then that might help. But I'm sure that KOMP and certainly the ICS working group would really like to see any of the leaflets, posters, information, letters, anything that you've produced, because sharing them with other people can be really helpful for people to think about how they can put in their own local information. So please do share any of the materials that you've produced with KOMP. I think, or send them to me. I can put my email, I will just put my email in the chat while I'm talking. I think that people have talked about various sort of influential people they've tried to talk to and lobby. That's MPs, councillors. Yeah, we need to keep doing that. I'm not sure that Jeremy Hunt is going to be very sympathetic, because somebody's put in the chat that he was involved in creating the Sustainability and Transformation Partnerships, which he was. He seems to have reinvented himself as the good guy with regard to the NHS now, but I wouldn't actually trust him. But we do have to try and get politicians on board, at the very least, to be trying to get issues raised when the bill is being debated. Even though the Tories have a big majority, the more that we can get things raised, the more that we can try and get the press, whether nationally or locally, to cover things, the better. Writing letters to local press is obviously is often a way of getting things in, rather than trying to do events for them to cover. So just keep doing all those things. I can't really answer the question that Victoria asked about discharging. You're right. I mean, there is this problem about people being pushed out of hospitals without appropriate care. I think to some extent that's where part of any social care bill may come in. But as people have said, as I said in the presentation, as others have said, there is still nothing on social care. So we wait to see what might fill that void. On the issue of funding, yes, of course, the NHS needs more resources and certainly staff need more pay. But we need to be careful because an awful lot of money that's gone into the NHS in the past, as I said, under the Labour government, actually went to the private sector. And we have to be really careful that when we're talking about resources, we want resources to invest and develop the NHS and to pay for staff within the NHS. We do not want it just to go straight into the hands of the privateers, or even, I must say, as one or two people have said, even to the voluntary and community sector. The voluntary sector usually means very big organisations, which are not little local community groups. They are big, they are business. Bupa was a charity, is a charity. Eton's a charity. You know, I think we need to be careful about which sort of organisations we're working with. So I would be quite wary of some of the big voluntary organisations as well. And I think other than that, really just to say, I hope that this presentation has been helpful. It will be on the KOMP website. I don't know what I can do about the red lines that were through it. I'll have to see if I can do anything about that. But I think, unfortunately, that may appear on YouTube. I don't think there's anything I can do about that now. But please do keep in touch with each other through KOMP. Keep sharing the information. Keep up the campaigning. And you know, we may not win against the bill, but one of these days we will win against these people who are trying to destroy the NHS. There's enough of us around to keep going and to keep defending it and keep fighting for it. So all I can say is please keep doing that, and thank you all for your support and for being here this evening. So thanks a lot. I think the meeting is going to close now. Look out for more information. Oh, one thing I did mean to say, it wasn't just me that wrote this presentation. This was written by a group. I cannot take all the credit. I can only take the credit for actually presenting it. But if your local group wants a talk, I can organise things. I can do a shorter version. I can do it without the slides. So, you know, if it would be helpful for your local group, there's either me and there are others in the working group as well who I'm sure could be persuaded. So do get in touch with us if you think that would be helpful. In fact, I'm going to Wandsworth and Lambeth tomorrow. Well, not going there, but by Zoom I'm going there tomorrow. So maybe see some of you there. Thanks very much.